So last week I finished the casting of Frank Stone, and just like the title and thumbnail suggest, I absolutely loved it. But I'm also hugely biased on the direction of Dead by Daylight, so the real question is, if you are looking for an Until Dawn-esque romp, should you play this game? Well, that depends heavily on a few key factors, and today I just wanted to explore the casting of Frank Stone so that you know what to expect, whether you're entirely new to this type of walking simulator, or if you're just a big Dead by Daylight fan wondering if it's going to resonate with you. So let's go over what it is, what I liked and did not like so much about this game, and then finally whether it's going to be right for you. Also, full disclosure, all of the footage that you're going to see in this video is from the PlayStation 5 version of the game. I was hoping that I could play through this on the Steam Deck, but when I couldn't get the Steam demo to work properly on the deck, I abandoned that idea and just jumped to the PS5 version. Which I kind of expected would happen after having had games like this struggle before on the deck, like Detroit Become Human, but yeah, just so you know, all of this footage is from the PlayStation 5 version of the game. And with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about what this game is all about. At its core, the casting of Frank Stone revolves around a ragtag bunch of kids in the small town of Cedar Hills in 1980 who are on a mission to make a movie. Specifically, a horror movie whose central set piece is located in a condemned steel mill, within which a range of grisly murders took place just years prior. But the time hopping doesn't end there. In fact, you'll be sliding backwards and forwards through time periodically depending on your choices to see how certain characters evolve over the course of many years and eventually tie the entire thing together. Or more to the point, there's just a whole lot of Tarantinoing going on. Now, because I don't want to spoil anything, I am going to keep most of the gameplay shown in this video to the 80s portion of the game, but let's talk a bit about the gameplay itself. If you've never tried this sort of game before, the bulk of your time is going to be spent walking around and examining your environment until you either trigger a QuickTime event, discover some new detail or collectible in the environment, or have to engage with what might be a time-limited decision to direct the course of the story. And even though some players will bemoan the reliance on QuickTime events or broadly painted ethical decision points, these are easily the most thrilling part of experiences like this. And that's because one wrong move can instantly result in death and dramatically shift the fate of our main characters and how their stories play out. And watching them play out is definitely fascinating. For starters, the visuals are top-notch for the most part. Even though there are only a handful of environments to explore as you work your way through Frank Stone's roughly 4 to 6 hour runtime, they're appropriately creepy and the sound design is excellent. The whole thing left me on edge as I crept through the dilapidated ruins of the mill or the opulent corridors of a posh present-day estate. And navigating the various characters through these environments stays interesting thanks to their distinct personalities and constantly trying to piece together how all of these different players in the story fit together. Sometimes character motivations or story elements seem clear on the surface, but I was caught unaware more than once by what seemed like a straightforward path, only to be immediately put on the back foot after I'd chosen poorly. Aside from navigating the perils of dialogue choices, there are also a few puzzles to be found in the casting of Frank Stone, but none of them really put up much of a challenge, and at least a few, appropriate as they may be for a Dead by Daylight spin-off game, do overstay their welcome just a little bit. Not a lot, but the magic of one puzzle's reveal does get spread a little bit thin, unfortunately. Overall, taken purely as a short, horror-focused narrative experience in isolation, the casting of Frank Stone is good, but not exactly great. If you've played other supermassive titles in this vein before, I think most would agree that a lot of the other titles are bigger, tell more interesting stories, and go harder on scares than what you're going to find here. However, if you are a Dead by Daylight fan, the casting of Frank Stone gets a lot harder to put down and a lot more fulfilling in a shameless fan service sort of way, and that is definitely the camp that I fall into. I've mentioned my love for Dead by Daylight before, but just for some perspective, I dabbled in it in its early years, but a couple of years ago as they started ramping up super fun expansions based around franchises like Alien, Chucky, and most recently Castlevania, I moved from casual fan to borderline obsessive. And having just recently passed 1,000 hours of gameplay, I don't see myself leaving the entity's realm anytime soon. And when I heard they were making this game set in the world of Dead by Daylight, I was immediately excited for it, but I did try to temper my expectations. Mostly because I was worried this game would just flirt with some Dead by Daylight ideas, or have the occasional Easter egg, but not really go all in on proving itself to be a living, breathing expansion of its world. Well, I'm happy to report that Frank Stone is overflowing with nods, lore, references, or direct connective tissue to Dead by Daylight. And because of that, I just about couldn't put it down. And truthfully, I had to sort of pace myself to keep from just rushing through the entire experience in a single sitting until 4 AM or something. Some of these references beat you over the head, while others are more subtle in their execution, and while it is completely shameless, I couldn't contain my excitement at each new revelation or reveal. But that's admittedly kind of a double-edged sword. While I loved searching high and low for every collectible and nod to the fans that I could find, it didn't take long for me to realize that this was the main thing pushing me forward. Don't get me wrong, the story is competent enough on its own, and I legitimately loved a few of the characters within it, but my overwhelming motivation to continue came from being a Dead by Daylight fan. And even though I loved it, it's definitely flawed for a few reasons. For starters, even though the mill is creepy, portions of it got reused way too often, and while the second time through I was excited to see what might have changed since my last visit, on the third and beyond it started getting progressively more disappointing as a location to paw through. On the flip side, the present-day mansion felt underutilized as a location, and while I enjoyed my time there, it just seemed like there could have been way more areas to explore. Also, while I won't spoil it here, there is something resembling a combat mechanic in a few choice sections, and how it's utilized is a pretty clever nod to another iconic horror franchise. But sadly, it did feel kind of perfunctory, like the devs just needed something to spice things up a bit, and while it was at least different from all of the walking, examining, and choice making, it still came off a little bit half-baked. So to recap, if you're looking for a fun, spooky tale to engage with for a few hours, the casting of Frank Stone does that, though maybe not as effectively as if you're a Dead by Daylight fan. So if you're just looking for scares and a fun evening of spooky, choose-your-own-adventure fare, you're likely to be better served by something like Until Dawn or The Quarry. But if you are a Dead by Daylight fan, then I highly recommend you play the casting of Frank Stone, if for no other reason than just to appreciate how much potential there is for Dead by Daylight as a whole. Because it really is exciting to see the lore, concepts, and maybe even a familiar face or two popping up outside of the entity's never-ending trials. And personally, I'm as thrilled as ever to see what's coming out of the fog next. Alright, so those are just a few quick thoughts on Behavior's latest game in the world of Dead by Daylight, but hey, what about you? Did you play this game, and if so, what were your thoughts on the casting of Frank Stone? Coming up on the channel, we have games dropping in October, a quick addendum on Decky Loader, and after that a whole lot of horror stuff since October is upon us. As always, thanks so much for taking the time to watch videos on my channel, have a great rest of your day or evening, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.